Okay, our textbook goes on to talk about middleman, minorities, and ethnic solidarity. Alejandro Portes and Ruben Rumbaugh in 1990 described 4 types of immigrants. The first type is secondary labor market. The secondary labor market of low-wage jobs with few benefits and security. In the United States, this group includes many recent Latin American and Caribbean immigrants, as well as labor migrants and internal colonial groups such as African Americans and Mexican Americans. Workers who arrive with select skills and credentials that are in great demand may move directly into the primary labor market and professional and technical employment. This group includes Asian, Indian, physicians, and other professionals, and Filipino and Hong Kong professionals educated in English, and select immigrants from East and South Asia and from Europe and elsewhere. It says that this phenomenon is called the brain drain because they are draining their home country of much needed talent. It says being integrated into society as colonial labor is much less appealing. Some scholars have suggested that one way immigrants may avoid this is by mobilizing ethnic solidarity within close-knit groups. The members of such groups work closely together to operate small businesses in otherwise poor or neglected areas. Often functioning as middleman minorities. It says that Jewish merchants have often served this role in both Europe and the United States. In recent years, Lebanese, Korean, and Chinese immigrants have moved rapidly into small business in the United States as owners of small groceries, liquor stores, laundries, small motels, and variety shops. These businesses are typically located in areas that are not well served by larger competitors, giving the middleman minorities a chance to gain an early foothold. The textbook goes into some more sugarcoating where it says middleman minority groups with their persistent upward mobility may be accepted by dominant groups, even seen as model minorities, but they often incur hostility of the people they serve. More sugarcoating with cultural misunderstandings can occur between business owners and customers. Then it does some more sugarcoating where it says Asian-owned stores in Black and Latino neighborhoods in New York have been the targets of boycotts and demonstrations, and during the rioting in Los Angeles, after the police officers accused of beating Rodney King were acquitted at trial, many residents in Black neighborhoods targeted Korean-owned business. And let's stop right there. The book does not talk about Latasha Harlins. Latasha Harlins, and this information comes from Black Then, a website. Latasha Harlins was a 15-year-old girl who was shot and killed on March 16, 1991 by Soon Ja-doo, a 51-year-old Korean store owner. Harlins was a student at Westchester High School in Los Angeles, California. Her death happened 13 days after the videotape of the Rodney King beating was released. And I like to mention too, if there are any Tupac fans out there like myself, you can hear in several of his songs, he mentions Latasha. So I just wanted to throw that out there. But again, you Tupac fans will be familiar with what I'm talking about. Store owner Do saw Harlins putting a bottle of orange juice in her backpack. She thought that the young girl was attempting to steal the bottle of juice. She did not see the money that Harlins had in her hand to pay for the juice. Do grabbed Harlins by the sweater in an attempt to snatch her backpack, but Harlins struck Do 3 times with her fist, allegedly knocking her to the ground. After Harlins backed away from Do picked up a stool and threw it at her. Harlins then picked up the orange juice that dropped during the scuffle and threw it on the counter and turned to leave the store. That is when Do reached under the counter to retrieve a handgun. She then fired at 15-year-old Harlins from behind in a distance of about 3 feet, shot her in the back of the head, killing her instantly. And I want to mention, it just came to mind about Laquan McDonald. He was shot 16 times in the back and he was walking away. I'll get back to Latasha Harlins. She died with $2 left in her hand. Dew claimed self-defense and testified that she felt her life was in danger. Just like George Zimmerman did when he murdered 17-year-old Trayvon Martin. He said that his life was in danger and he felt threatened. Okay, the website also goes on to say that security camera footage showed Dew shooting Harlins in the back of the head while she was leaving the store. And so it was on video, just like there's video of Eric Garner being choked to death, just like there's video of Alton Sterling being shot to death. This has been going on for a very long time, but I digress. The website goes on to say that on November 15th, 1991, the jury found Dew guilty of voluntary manslaughter with a 16-year prison sentence recommendation, believing that Dew's shooting was fully within her control and she fired the gun voluntarily, meaning she did it. She knew what she was doing. The presiding judge, Joyce Carlin, reduced the sentence of probation of 5 years and 400 hours community service and a $500 fine. She never served a day, much like Peter Liang, the Asian NYPD officer who was convicted of murder in shooting Akai Gurley. Although he was convicted of murder, he was given probation and hasn't served a day. And I believe his sentence was 5 years probation as well, just like this store owner. The book goes on to talk about an alternate strategy, again, forgive my mispronunciations and my tongue-tiedness, if that's even a word. An alternate strategy some immigrants use to cluster into an ethnic enclave, an area in which ethnic entrepreneurs hire and serve the needs of co-ethnics, creating their own ethnic labor market. This reminds me, let me go ahead and read what the rest of the book. It says that poor recent refugees from Cuba can find employment in the businesses of middle-class Cuban Americans who came first, and recent workers from the People's Republic of China can find work for Taiwanese business owners. This reminds me of the strategy of group economics that Dr. Claude Anderson talks about. He teaches that one of the keys to improving the condition of African Americans is to practice group economics. And I believe in that also. I think that's very important. The next section of the book is the analytic debate, cultures and structures of poverty. Why do some new immigrant groups experience relatively rapid upward mobility while others struggle with low wages and little mobility? It says, note the size and distribution, timing, and mix of any given group may affect the strategies available to its members. Yes, I believe that those factors can play a large role. However, much of it is by design. Immigrants from foreign countries can come over here to the U.S. and get business loans with ease. However, it can be extremely difficult for an African American citizen whose family has been here for generations or hundreds of years rather, scratch generations, whose family has been here for hundreds of years to receive the same loans. That is why that I say some groups are allowed and even help to succeed, while other groups are often sabotaged. This book goes on to talk about Oscar Lewis coining the term cultural poverty, which William Ryan referred to as blaming the victim. I tend to agree with Gunnar Myrdal, a Swedish economist who was a keen observer of American life. He called the great discrepancy between this country's claims to ideals of freedom and equality and the reality that the nation was built on racial oppression and inequality, the American dilemma. He said that the poor attended poor schools and were then faulted for failing to value education. They were segregated in dilapidated housing in poor neighborhoods and then faulted for failing to keep up their property. They were denied promotions and job opportunities and then faulted for failing to value hard work. And they were denied the resources for self-improvement and then faulted for dressing, speaking, and acting poorly. This cycle continues today and perhaps can be broken only if addressed from both directions. Okay, I'd like to go back to the part about the poor schools. Speaking of poor schooling, there is an epidemic of Black and Latino children being misdiagnosed with learning disabilities and being herded into special education. With no education comes no skills. With no skills comes no opportunities. And this is a part of the school to prison pipeline. You can read more about that in this book by Dr. Umar Johnson, The Psychoacademic Holocaust, the Miseducation and ADH Wars Against Black Boys. I hear so many people talking about someone they know is allowing the school to put their child in special ed without them questioning it, without them getting a second opinion. I mean, it's reaching epidemic proportions, and I would really suggest that any child of Black and brown, any parent of Black and brown children, especially little boys, but I've heard of little girls, it's happening too as well, but I would suggest that you pick up this book and that you look into information provided by this gentleman here, Dr. Umar Johnson, because he makes it his life mission to help these children. So again, check out this book. And I'd like to go on to say that, yes, people can make decisions that can cause their situations to be much worse. And again, this makes me think of the book Random Family that I talked about earlier. But if someone is born and raised in poverty and they don't have access to resources, of course, their life chances are going to be extremely limited. So that's why I don't go along with the culture of poverty narrative. The next section of the book talks about the color line. And it says for a long time, Americans have been obsessed with color, and that two colors, black and white, have dominated the polls, pulling everyone in between in one direction or another. It talks about lighter groups, even in the African American community. Color often mattered. Having a light complexion was deemed as an advantage, whereas having a dark complexion carried a stigma. This mindset goes back to slavery. The slave masters used colorism as a strategy to keep slaves divided and against one another. Unfortunately, this mindset is still rampant today. And it's also talked about in something called the Willie Lynch letter that you may want to look into and read more about. That is one of the strategies that was used to keep slavery going, as you know, as far as to keep them in slavery, the mindset of slavery. Our textbook goes on to talk about the linguistic line. In layman's terms, that's basically how, for example, if you're looking for a job, if you're trying to conduct business, you may try to sound white on the phone, or if you're in a job interview, you may change your voice or your mannerisms, the way you speak, in order to sound more white so that you can get the job. The last section of this chapter is about the color of justice. It talks about the injustices faced by what it calls invisible minorities. The book talks about how for a long time, African Americans, especially African American males, are deemed as suspicious in certain settings. It talks about how a deep racial divide has worked its way into the criminal justice system over more than a century, and how law enforcement in the rural South was marred for decades by vigilante groups and lynching and clan-affiliated sheriffs and local police. It talks about how there was also segregation and discrimination in law enforcement in the North. I would like to add, and you can Google this, I don't have all of the information on it, but I do have, actually I do, it's on melanoidnation.org. They did a story about this. In 2006, the FBI sent out a memo that white supremacist groups were infiltrating law enforcement. And Tariq Nasheed actually touched on this on a recent interview he did on the Dr. Drew Show. And again, you can find more information about that on melanoidnation.org. There's a story about that. The textbook goes on to say that race further compounds the risk by adding the factor of being a visible minority. Race is still one of the most common descriptions used for describing a suspect in a crime. So for those who share that race, perhaps combined with gender and age, such as young black men, become suspects. And that reminded me of a joke that Dave Chappelle actually did in one of his stand-ups, where he was talking about the radio station or the news station saying, we're looking for a black male between 4 feet and 6 feet tall. And, you know, just this broad, you know, just basically what they're talking about in the book. And he was like, I'm staying in the house tonight. So he made a joke out of it, but he was bringing up a real life issue. The textbook also goes on to say that the greater challenge for African American communities, however, remains for those who are stopped and arrested, beginning a long line of brushes with the law that eventually leads to incarceration. The textbook also says that incarceration pushes you out of the job market. Incarceration disqualifies you from feeding your family with food stamps. Incarceration allows for housing discrimination based on a criminal background check. Incarceration increases your risk of homelessness. Incarceration increases your chances of being incarcerated again. The book textbook says, mass incarceration also deprives an extraordinary number of ex-prisoners of the basic democratic right to vote, which I talked about in the very beginning of this presentation, about not being allowed to participate in the government process. And it says that blacks are disenfranchised at 4 times the rate of non-African Americans. That brings me to The New Jim Crow by Michelle Alexander. This book is a must-read for anyone who is truly against social injustice, specifically the mass incarceration of black and brown people in the United States. Mass incarceration has reached epidemic proportions. It is literally the new Jim Crow. It is a legal form of slavery and discrimination. And also, modern day slavery is backed by a clause in the 13th Amendment. If you don't believe me, look it up. I would also like to add that the policies of President Bill Clinton has caused the incarceration of more black men than any other president in history. And I do want to throw in that in 1996, Hillary helped to campaign this with him. That's when she called black children super predators. So y'all think about that the next time she comes around, y'all dancing and millie rocking and nay-naying and all that for your vote. Think about that. And basically, that is the end of my presentation. And again, I apologize for being so long-winded and going over, but I really wanted to be thorough. I really wanted to be thorough, and I wanted to cover all of the information. And I really did want to put in how I feel that it applies to what we are going through right now. Me as a black woman, I'm mixed, but I'm a black woman in America. My sons will be black men in America. So I have to stay vigilant. I have to know what's going on in this world in order to protect my children and keep them safe. But again, I want to mention Hidden Colors 1, 2, and 3. And they are produced by a gentleman by the name of Tariq Nasheed. He is very thorough. He works very hard in the community to he does so much. Like, I mean, I can't even put it into words. And he is one of my idols. And I respect this man. I respect him. So look into that. And I cannot close without mentioning this baby right here. Tamir Rice was 12 years old, playing with a toy gun in the park when he was shot and murdered by police. He reminds me of my son. When I look at him, I see my oldest son. So it was very important to me to make sure that you see this angel. Some people may just turn on the news, hear about these things and say, oh, it doesn't apply to me. This is somebody's child. This is somebody's child who never saw his 13th birthday because he was doing what a child does. He was outside playing. But because he was a young black male, they deemed him a threat. They criminalized him. Ohio is an open carry state. So even if it were a real gun, you still had no legal right to shoot him down like a dog. And I apologize for my emotion. But again, when I see this little boy, I see my son. So again, I apologize for going over my time by probably twice the limit. So please forgive me. I hope that you watched both of my videos, and I hope that I've covered everything. And I hope that I've done what I was supposed to do in this assignment. It really meant a lot to me. I'm really talking from my heart. I read a lot of quotes from the book, but I'm talking from my heart. So I hope that you all enjoy this presentation. Good luck to all my classmates. I hope that you enjoyed doing your presentation as well. And I hope that you do well. I hope that I do well. Thank you to you all for watching. Thank you to my professor. I appreciate you guys, and much respect, and God bless.